Welcome to the Transform My Dance Studio podcast, the only podcast for dance studio owners, where each week we bring you business growth strategies to help you increase your profits, impact the lives of more students, while ensuring you get back some time to have a little life outside of the studio. It's time for you to become the go-to studio in your area. Now, here's your host, founder of the Dance Studio Owners Association, Clint Salter.
Hey there, dance studio owners. Welcome to the Transform My Dance Studio podcast. It's Clint here, and I'm pumped that you're joining us for today's episode. Now, for today's podcast, I'm joined by Peter Bregman, the founder and CEO of Bregman Partners. Peter's company has a passion and focus on strengthening leadership in people and in organizations across the world. He's also the author of 4 Seconds, All the Time You Need to Stop Counterproductive Habits and Get the Results You Want. A New York Post top pick for your career in 2015. His previous award-winning book was the Wall Street Journal bestseller, 18 Minutes, Find Your Focus, Master Distraction, and Get the Right Things Done. You guys, I know, are going to be so excited to hear Peter. He's got great energy and a lot of knowledge when it comes to becoming more productive and also becoming a leader, the CEO of your studio. So, hey, Peter, how are you? Thanks for joining us.
I'm well, thanks. Thanks for having me.
So, Peter, for those that might not know about the work that you do, can you tell us in about 60 seconds, what is it that you do in the world and how do you help your clients?
Our focus is a couple of fold. One of the things that we do with organizations is we help them focus on the one thing that's most important for them to achieve over the next 12 months. And we align and amplify the performance of the people who are working there to really drive through to that outcome. So a lot of organizations often have several strategies, but aren't particularly clear about what it is that they really need to prioritize and have people do. And that's true for individuals too. The book I wrote before 4 Seconds is called 18 Minutes, Find Your Focus, Master Distraction, Get the Right Things Done. And it's the same principle. It's what is most important for us to achieve, and how do we say hell yes to the things that we really want to do, and no to everything that doesn't fit into that category of hell yes. And we do a lot of coaching, and we do a lot of leadership training. I run a leadership intensive twice a year that is really focused on people stepping profoundly into their leadership and being able to really show up in ambiguous, uncertain situations, but with confidence and grounded. And so that's where we focus our time.
Yeah, and I love that because leadership, for our studio owners, a lot of them started as dance teachers, turned studio owners, and they become leaders. They become leaders of teachers, of their office staff. And so I'd love to know, what do you believe is holding business owners back from reaching their full potential when it comes to becoming the leader?
So given what you've just described, right, we've got studio owners who were dancers ahead of time. And when you think about performance of any kind, you think about dance, right? And especially early in your dance career probably, but probably to some degree all the time. You're stepping into a performance and there's some stress level, there's some fear, there's some challenge. If there's not, it wouldn't be so interesting. And ultimately, the thing that gets in our way is when we limit our performance because of that charge and of that fear. And the way I talk about it in terms of leadership is leaders have to constantly take risks. We have to have hard conversations. We have to take risks with the choices we make around cost and revenue and marketing. We have to take risks in terms of actually listening to our employees and maybe being criticized and not lose ourselves or not get defensive in the face of that criticism. There's a tremendous number of risks we have to take as leaders. The only thing that prevents us from moving forward in what's important to us, it's not knowledge or capability. It's not motivation, right? These are the things that usually people train for and try to develop. It's none of those things. Anything you need to know about leadership or management, you could learn by picking up a book in terms of, a gap of knowledge. You need a communication process. I can give you a ton of books. And that stuff's not hard. What's hard is what I call emotional courage. It's the willingness to feel things that you have to feel in order to do things that you have to do. So in order to have a hard conversation with an employee, I just had a hard conversation with an employee just now. In order to do that, I have to feel my concern for the employee. I have to feel my sense of failure that I don't want to have. I have to feel that they might leave me, or they might criticize me back, or they might reject me in whatever ways. If I'm going to have a hard conversation, I have to be willing to feel all of those things. And if I'm not willing to feel those things, I won't do the hard things I need to do as a leader. And so the hardest thing about leadership, and by the way, it's why this leadership intensive I talked about, it's a 4-day program that we do off-site, and it's a deep experiential process. And the reason is because the only thing we really want to teach people is how do you stand firmly and powerfully in who you are in the context of all these emotions that you may have in between you and what it is that you really need to do. And I think that's the hardest thing. But once you have that skill, then every opportunity is open to you. One of the things that I like to say, if you are willing to feel everything, then you can do anything. Right? The only reason we stop ourselves from doing anything is because there's something we don't want to feel.
Totally. I think that's in all areas of our life, not just in being a leader in our business.
Absolutely. But I think any time you do something that's possibly going to bring up an emotion, I consider that a leadership move. So I think we're leaders in all sorts of ways. I could take leadership in writing a letter to someone that opens up a conversation that wasn't open before. Does anyone write letters anymore? Maybe I meant email, but sometimes I do write letters.
I write letters too.
Good. And in fact, I find that they have a tremendous emotional impact when you write letters because nobody does anymore. But if you're doing that, I mean, it's an act of leadership to write something to yourself that feels like it moves you in a new direction. Anytime you're moving from one place to another place, when that other place has some fear associated with it, or is new, or is in the midst of some ambiguity where the outcome is not clear, by definition, that's an act of leadership.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with you. It makes a lot of sense. Now, I know when you talk about leadership, you also talk about accountability, and that's a huge part of being an effective leader. Now, in our association, a lot of our studio owners talk about how they struggle to keep their team of teachers and their office staff, delivering on their commitments. I mean, how can you shed a bit of light on this? What do you consider to be the fundamentals of effectively keeping others and also yourself accountable?
I think the first question you have to ask is, what is the outcome that I'm going for here? If you don't know the outcome, then it's going to be very, very hard for anybody to be accountable. I don't think that we should be accountable to the amount of time we spend on something or the effort that we put into something. I think we should be accountable to outcomes. And so if we could be very clear about this is the outcome that we're going for, then we know for sure whether we're achieving that outcome or not. If we're not clear about the outcome, then it's very, very hard to be accountable. And accountability is a sense of ownership. Right? Accountability is a sense that I own what it is that I'm doing, and I will do what I need to do to make it happen. Well, if your outcomes are not clear, it's going to be very, very hard to own anything, right? Because because what is there to own if you don't know what the outcome is? And ultimately, in order to create that kind of ownership amongst people, which is really what you want people feeling like that studio is their studio. You want everybody to have the founder's mentality. You want everybody to have a sense that, I'm accountable for this because I own it, because I care as deeply for this thing as I would if I really did own it. So to create that, I think you need both relationships with people and you need a clear sense of accountability. I'm sorry, a clear sense of ownership, which drives the accountability.
And so really what you're saying, and I think this is where sometimes there's a breakdown with our studio owners, and you talk about being clear on the outcome, is I feel like sometimes, the teachers and the office staff aren't on the same page and they don't know what they're working towards or what that end goal is. Do you see that that's a mistake that a lot of leaders are making with their team?
Yeah, I think that the real question behind that question is what stops them from making that clear? So ultimately, is it a bashfulness? Do I not want to say to my staff, look, we need this to be profitable. We need we need a steady stream of revenue here. Or to say, or as an artist, if I'm running a dance studio and I'm an artist myself, as an artist, do I have a sense that I want something to go in a certain direction, but I don't necessarily want to hamper your creativity because I consider you an artist as well. And so maybe I'm not as clear, or I'm not as specific, or I'm not as demanding in a sense as I would want to be. Or maybe I have such a clear artistic vision that I'm incredibly demanding and I'm incredibly articulate and focused about what it is that I want, but not just the outcome, but exactly how I want it to be done. And so I've taken away all ownership from someone because they have no more creative license to make their own decisions. And if you can't make your own decisions, you're not going to own something. So, I think it's about looking specifically at your own behavior. And here's a way to do that, by the way. And again, it's something that we do in the Leadership Intensive, which is that we have everybody collect their own feedback. So one of the things that I really suggest is go talk to the people who work for you and ask them, what am I doing that helps you to be successful and that helps this studio be successful? And what do I do that gets in your way or gets in other people's way? And remember, you don't have to change your behavior based on what they say, but you have to know that that's the perception that's out there. And that's really important. And you cannot get defensive. I mean, we coach people around this because if you'll work against yourself if you ask them that question and then you get defensive about what they tell you. Ultimately, it's most successful when you are able to ask those questions and really take in the information and people feel heard, and that already starts to build their ownership and their accountability. And you end up gaining a lot of information about what you need to do in order to help them move to the next level.
And I think this is something that I do with my team every 90 days. We have a conversation that's very similar, and I ask these questions. And, I just want to shed some light. At first, the first couple of times you do this exercise, it's quite challenging. And then it gets a lot easier and you can move forward and have, I found that the relationships I now have with my staff are a lot more open. We communicate a lot more freely with each other because we feel like we have a safe space and everyone can be heard.
Yeah. And, it's, let me offer something to listeners if you want, which is that the first step in our leadership program is to collect this feedback. And I sort of set that up on a conference call that I share with people about how to collect their feedback. And I've decided recently to open that call to anybody who's possibly interested in the intensive, in the leadership program, or people who just want to get more information about how to collect feedback. So if you go to my website, it's a free call. You could just sign up for it. And it's a short call. It's like 30 minutes. And I spend about 20 minutes talking about how to collect feedback and how to stand in a way that allows you to create that open environment and to really get people talking because that's what you care most about. And that's at peterbregman.com. And you could, we could link to it, I'm sure, on your website, but
we'll do that. We'll link to it in the show notes.
Great. And it's just like an added way of people getting a little more information about how to go about creating that environment that you're talking about.
Yeah. How important do you think, it is as a leader for us to really be mentors of our staff, of our team, because a lot of people have the mentality of, I'm paying you to do this job, you need to do this job. I mean, what are some of the common mistakes that you see leaders making when it comes to, nurturing and supporting their staff?
It's interesting. I just had a conversation, as I was mentioning, with someone on my staff, and it was both telling him about something that I was having a hard time with, and also at the end, I mentored him a little bit. And I felt in myself an obstacle to doing that mentoring. And the reason was I felt like, look, I just gave him some critical feedback, and I've also given him positive feedback. I gave him both, but I felt like if I'm going to mentor him at this point, am I going to sound too grandiose? Is it going to come off as arrogant? Is it going to be, let me tell you how things work? All of those messages were coming through my head. And I had to get over that to go, you know what? I actually really care about him. I want him to succeed. First of all, he works for me and I want him to succeed. Second of all, he's a good guy. He's a good guy and I want him to succeed. Whether or not he was working with me, I want him to succeed. And so, I had to get over that and I had to recommit to why am I doing this? And I think, it's really important to come from an open-hearted place when you're sharing that kind of feedback and when you're sharing that kind of mentoring and growth. And it's absolutely essential that we help the people who are working for us grow, because one person once said to me, it was interesting, they said, what if I train all my people? He was averse to training his people. And he said, what if I train my people and they leave? And so then I put all this money and energy into training them, and then they just leave me and go join another company or imagine another studio. And my answer to him was, imagine the alternative, that you don't train them and they stay. Right? Like, ultimately, then you've just, you're creating mediocrity and you have to take that risk. You have to say, you know what, I'm going to take the risk and I'm going to mentor them, but I'm going to do it out of a place of caring.
Yeah. I completely agree with you. And, I think it's important for our studio owners as well. I mean, a lot of them, Peter, might have had teachers that have left them in the past and opened up their own studio. So they're feeling maybe a bit burnt and discouraged by that. So they're not putting the time and energy into their staff in case someone else goes and does that. I mean, how would you kind of coach them around kind of getting that and getting back to a place of trust and investing in their people?
A big piece of it, and this may sound like it's coming out of left field, is how do you feel about yourself? Like, do you feel good about yourself? Are you eating well? Are you sleeping well? Do you kind of meditate or have some spiritual practice that helps you stay grounded? How do you feel? What is your self-esteem? Because if you're feeling strong and you're feeling like you're standing on your own 2 feet, and by the way, that should not be in any way dependent upon whether your studio is successful or making money or anything. It's got to be stronger than that. It's got to be stronger than the success of the last venture that you've done. If you're standing strong, then you will be able to show up and have those kinds of conversations. And if you're not able to have those conversations, then there's lots of things that are going to get you down, including employees who aren't behaving the way that they should be behaving. So, I would say really, you need to shore up your own resources. You need to take a moment quietly to get clear about what's important to you. And then from that place, you have those conversations.
Yeah. Wow, I love that. I love that piece of advice. I think it's crucial. I always say, if you don't work, nothing does. So I think kind of coming back to you is important. I know we're kind of short on time, Peter, so I'd love to wrap up with you and ask you, what are your 3 tips for, being an effective leader inside of your dance studio?
I would say the first biggest tip is I'm going to kind of summarize some of the stuff that we said. Know the outcomes that you want. Be super clear about the outcomes you want. What are you going for? What do you want with your studio? What do you want for your customers? What do you want for your employees? What is the outcome that you're going for? What is the big picture? What is your mission? Why did you start this thing? The second is your emotional courage, your willingness to feel everything. I mean, there's a reason. I've taught a lot of leadership over the past 20 years. There's a reason that the only leadership class I teach now is this 4-day on emotional courage. And it's because the results you get from being willing to feel everything is out of this world. Like it's transformational. So the idea that you are willing to feel everything, that you have developed your emotional courage muscle, that you are courageous with your emotions, is very, very important for leaders to be able to follow through on what it is that they do. And then the third piece I would say is gratitude, is to really look at what you've created and what you're creating and the relationships that you have and the people who are coming to your studio and the fact that you have a studio at all, the fact that, you have, even if they're virtual relationships like this one with you, and the podcast, and that those are really rich parts of a life that you've created for yourself. And to feel that kind of gratitude is really helpful in terms of being able to show up with power that you need to show up as a leader and as a head of your studio.
I love it. I love it. Look, Peter, thank you so much for your time today. Where can our listeners go to get more information about the intensive and obviously the work that you do?
So if you go to Peter Bregman, PeterBregman.com, everything's on there, and you'll see there's a tab in the menu for leadership programs, and you could just click on the leadership program there. And anything else, there's lots of videos and articles, and everything's in the resources part of that site, and you can find everything there.
Awesome. Well, look, really appreciate you taking the time out to chat with me today about leadership, an important subject for our studio owners. So thanks again.
My great pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us today. For all the resource links from the show and to receive access to our free dance studio growth training, make sure you visit transformmydancestudio.com.